Right now, 8,000 satellites are circling Earth at 17,000 miles per hour. Over 60% of them belong to one man. And the number is growing daily. Starlink is SpaceX's satellite internet constellation, launched in 2019. Its mission sounds simple: blanket the planet with high-speed broadband from low Earth orbit, reaching every corner humanity inhabits. Traditional internet runs through fiber optic cables buried in the ground and stretched across ocean floors. For half the world, that infrastructure simply does not exist or never will. Older satellite internet used giant geostationary satellites parked 22,000 miles up. The signal delay was punishing, speeds were slow, and the service cost a fortune to operate. Elon Musk's gamble was different. Place thousands of small satellites just 300 miles overhead, where signals travel fast and latency feels like cable. It was a radical bet. To make it work, SpaceX needed cheap, reusable rockets. The Falcon 9, landing itself upright on a drone ship, suddenly made mass satellite launches financially possible for the first time. Before Starlink, launching a single satellite could cost $200 million. SpaceX dropped that price to under $1 million per satellite, completely rewriting the economics of orbit. The Federal Communications Commission approved an initial 12,000 satellites. Then SpaceX asked for 30,000 more. The total ceiling could reach 42,000 satellites in low Earth orbit alone. Each satellite weighs about 560 pounds, the size of a small desk. They communicate via laser links, forming a mesh network in space that bypasses ground stations entirely. User terminals are flat dishes that aim themselves automatically. Plug them in, point them at the sky, and within minutes you have broadband almost anywhere on the planet. By 2025, Starlink had over 5 million subscribers across 120 countries. Revenue passed $8 billion annually. SpaceX became the most valuable private company on Earth. But Starlink is more than fast internet. It is reshaping who controls communication itself. And that has set off the most expensive space race since the Cold War ended. Amazon entered the fight with Project Kuiper. 3,000 satellites planned. $10 billion committed. Jeff Bezos refuses to let Musk own the sky without a serious challenge from his company. China launched the Guoang constellation, planning 13,000 satellites. The Qianfan constellation adds another 15,000. Beijing sees space internet as a strategic asset, not just a consumer product. The European Union approved IRIS², its own €6 billion constellation. Officials called it a sovereignty issue. Europe refuses to depend on American or Chinese networks for critical communications. OneWeb, backed by Britain and India, launched 600 satellites before merging with French Eutelsat. The combined company races to serve enterprise and government clients that distrust private American control. Russia announced Sphere, its own constellation of nearly 400 satellites. South Korea, Japan, and Canada all have national programs in motion. Every major power wants its own private sky. The numbers are staggering. Before 2019, humanity had launched roughly 9,000 satellites in total history. Within 10 years, that number is projected to exceed 100,000. Low Earth orbit was once empty. Now it is crowded. Astronomers report that nearly every long-exposure telescope image contains streaks from passing Starlink satellites contaminating scientific observations. The International Astronomical Union has formally protested. Some major observatories now lose up to 40% of their useful sky to satellite trails. Decades of astronomy research are at risk. Collision risk is rising fast. The European Space Agency reported tens of thousands of close approach alerts every week. One bad crash could trigger Kessler Syndrome, a chain reaction of debris. Kessler Syndrome means orbital debris hits another satellite, breaking it into thousands of fragments. Those fragments hit more satellites. Eventually, low Earth orbit becomes unusable for generations of humanity. Starlink satellites have built-in thrusters and autonomous collision avoidance. But human-operated competitors and old debris cannot maneuver. Every new launch increases the chance of catastrophe in shared orbital lanes. Then there is the bandwidth problem. Radio spectrum is finite. Every constellation needs allocated frequencies, and international bodies are struggling to keep up with the avalanche of applications they receive. The ITU, the United Nations agency that allocates spectrum, was built for a world of dozens of satellites. Now it processes thousands of filings annually with rules dating to 1973. Countries are gaming the system. File for spectrum you have no intention to use. Block competitors. Hold the rights for decades. This is the new colonialism, just played out above the atmosphere. Starlink's military applications grew quickly. The U.S. Department of Defense signed contracts worth billions. A specialized version, Starshield, was designed exclusively for classified national security missions and intelligence operations. Ukraine became the proof of concept for space-based warfare. When Russia invaded in 2022, Ukrainian internet was crippled. Starlink terminals arrived within days and changed the war completely. Ukrainian drones, intelligence units, and frontline soldiers use Starlink to coordinate strikes, share video, and direct artillery. It became the most consequential military communication tool of the entire conflict. But Elon Musk personally controlled the kill switch. In one reported incident, he refused to enable Starlink near Crimea during a Ukrainian naval drone strike. That decision changed battlefield outcomes. Suddenly, a private citizen had veto power over military operations of a sovereign nation. Pentagon officials were horrified. Allies asked uncomfortable questions about who actually controls modern infrastructure of war. The Crimea incident exposed the central tension. Starlink is critical national infrastructure for dozens of countries. But it is owned and operated by one company, answering to one billionaire. And here's what changed everything. In 2023, the Pentagon quietly signed Starshield. It hands SpaceX direct contracts to build a custom military satellite network for the U.S. government. Suddenly, the world's most important communication network and a U.S. military spy constellation share orbits, share infrastructure, share engineers. The line between private business and national defense vanished entirely. China responded fast. Beijing labeled Starlink a threat to national security. State media called it a weapon. Generals published papers about how to destroy thousands of low-orbit satellites if needed. Russia tested a satellite-killing missile, blowing apart its own old spacecraft. The debris cloud forced the International Space Station crew to shelter. It was an unmistakable warning about future conflict. And then came the financial revelation. Starlink generates more revenue than all other satellite operators combined. SpaceX projects that by 2030, it will earn over $30 billion annually. That cash flow funds something bigger. Every Starlink dollar feeds Starship, the rocket designed to put humans on Mars. The space internet war is funding the first interplanetary civilization. Here's the kicker. Whoever wins low Earth orbit controls the data of the future. AI, finance, defense, entertainment, agriculture. Every connected device on Earth will eventually route through these constellations. Musk has stated it openly. The goal is not just internet. The goal is to own the world's communication backbone before any government catches up to what is actually happening. And he is winning. Starlink launches more satellites in a single week than most countries launch in a decade. The lead is widening, not closing. Competitors are years behind, falling further back. The lesson is that infrastructure equals power. Whoever owns the pipes, owns the conversation. In the 20th century, it was undersea cables and oil pipelines. In ours, it is orbital constellations. Starlink works because three things aligned. Reusable rockets cut launch costs by 90%. Mass production turned satellites into commodities. And vertical integration meant SpaceX controlled every link of the chain. Competitors struggle because none have all three advantages. Amazon outsources launches. China lacks reusable rockets. Europe has neither scale nor speed. The structural moat around Starlink is genuinely enormous. Governments are scrambling to catch up. New regulations on orbital traffic, spectrum allocation, and dual-use technology are being drafted. But policy moves in years while SpaceX launches in weeks consistently. The deeper truth is that space is no longer a domain of nations. It is a domain of corporations. And the rules of corporate competition do not always align with humanity's long-term interests. For ordinary users, Starlink delivers something genuinely valuable. Remote villages get internet. Aircraft get connectivity. Disaster zones come back online in hours. The technology is real, useful, and transformative. But the trade-off is concentration. Critical infrastructure increasingly depends on the decisions of a handful of private companies, operating across borders, answerable to shareholders rather than democratic publics or accountable institutions. The space internet war will define the next several decades. Astronomy, warfare, economics, and geopolitics are all being reshaped above our heads. Most people on Earth have no idea this is happening. Now you do. Subscribe for more deep dives into the systems shaping our world, and drop a comment with your take on Starlink.